Why does February get stuck with only 28 days? Why do October, November, and December, which literally mean 8, 9, and 10, sit at months 10, 11, and 12? And why do half of Christians celebrate Christmas on December 25th, while the other half celebrate on January 7th? Was Jesus born twice? The calendar we use today is one of the messiest systems we've ever lived by. And truth be told, it wasn't really invented in the classical sense, designed once and perfected. It stumbled into existence, patched together from clashing systems across cultures and centuries. Some of those patches were clever. Others were pure politics or outright mistakes. Our calendar isn't a model of logic. It's a historical blooper reel we've all just agreed to live by. Of course, people didn't invent calendars just to confuse future generations. They needed a way to measure seasons, months, whole cycles for very pragmatic reasons. When to plant crops, when to collect taxes, or predict the flooding of rivers. A reliable calendar wasn't just convenient, it was survival. Without one, societies risked famine, chaos, and collapse. The earliest calendars turned to the most obvious guide in the sky. The moon. It's visible, it changes shape in a neat cycle, and anyone can follow it without tools. Months were built around the lunar cycle of about 29.5 days. Simple, but the problem was, 12 lunar months only give you 354 days, nearly 2 weeks short of the solar year, which meant festivals and planting seasons kept drifting out of place. To fix it, many cultures added leap months every so often, an awkward patchwork that still left people confused. That was until the Egyptians made the big step forward. They based their calendar on the sun instead. By around 3000 BCE, they had locked in a 365-day year. They noticed that the star Sirius rose just before dawn each summer, right when the Nile began to flood, a flood that made their fields fertile. Linking the calendar to this solar sign gave them a system that matched nature much more closely. It wasn't perfect, they still missed a quarter of a day each year, but it was a giant leap forward. And from Egypt, the idea of solar calendars spread into the Mediterranean, where the Romans would eventually try their hand at building one, with predictably messy results. When the idea of solar calendars reached Rome, things got complicated. The earliest Roman calendar had just 10 months because it was mainly designed to track the farming season. Winter was ignored completely, just a nameless dead zone at the end of the year. That's why we still have months named after numbers that don't match. September, October, November, and December literally mean 7, 8, 9, and 10, yet they're months 9 through 12 today. Around 713 BCE, King Numa Pompilius added January and February to cover winter, but that only made things messier. The Roman year became a patchwork of months with 29 or 31 days, constantly tweaked by priests and politicians. Leaders sometimes stretched or shortened years to keep allies in office longer or to cut short the terms of rivals. Imagine if your boss just decided to extend February for a couple of weeks to meet a deadline. The chaos was legendary. Some years had only 355 days, others, with added leap months, ballooned to 377 or more. By the time Julius Caesar came to power, spring festivals were drifting into summer and nobody was quite sure what year it was. Luckily, Caesar had a plan. In 46 BCE, with help from Alexandrian astronomers, he introduced the Julian calendar, a solar calendar with 365 days plus an extra leap day every 4 years to account for the fact that an astronomical year is about 365.25 days. For the first time, Rome had a system that, mostly, matched the heavens. But first, Caesar had to realign the existing mess. That meant creating a one-off monster year with 445 days to get the calendar back in sync, known ever since as the Year of Confusion. Imagine living through the longest year in history just so the dates would make sense again. That also meant adjusting the lengths of months. In the old Roman system, months were 29 or 31 days, because Romans were superstitious about even numbers. And 28 for February, which resulted in a 355 days long year. February was considered unlucky and was devoted to rites of purification at the end of the year. When Caesar reformed the calendar into a solar one, he added 10 extra days spread across the year. And again, February, the unlucky one, kept its awkward 28 days in common years, with the leap day added every 4 years. Basically, February fell victim to Roman superstitions. And of course, Caesar made sure to leave his mark. The month Quintilis was renamed July in his honor. Later, Augustus followed suit, renaming Sextilis as August. The Roman ego was now permanently built into your planner. The Julian calendar was such an improvement that it spread across Europe and lasted more than 1,600 years. But almost right isn't the same as perfect, and eventually, those tiny roundup errors began to pile up again. Remember, the real solar year is 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, 46 seconds, not 365 and a quarter. That difference of just 11 minutes and 14 seconds a year might not sound like much, but over centuries it added up. By the Middle Ages, the calendar was out of sync with the seasons by almost 10 days. The spring equinox, which was supposed to fall on March 21st, was drifting earlier and earlier. This mattered most to the church because Easter is tied to the equinox. By the 1500s, people were celebrating Easter practically in summer. The drift was obvious, but fixing it was another story. Different regions and rulers tinkered with local solutions. But without a central authority, Europe kept stumbling along with an increasingly broken calendar. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, everyone agreed something had to change. And who held greater authority in Europe at that time than the Catholic Church? In February 1582, Pope Gregory XIII issued his decree on calendar reform. His fix was bold. Cut 10 days out of October that year to bring the equinox back in line and add a smarter leap year rule. From then on, years divisible by 100 would not be leap years unless they were also divisible by 400. That shift and tweak became the Gregorian calendar. It stopped the drift and kept the year far closer to the solar cycle. Catholic countries adopted it right away, but Protestant nations resisted, suspicious of a papal plot. Britain and its colonies didn't switch until 1752. By then, the gap had grown to 11 days, and people were bewildered to see whole chunks of their lives suddenly vanish from the calendar. And some never switched at all. The Eastern Orthodox Church acknowledged Gregory's reform, but stuck with the Julian calendar for religious festivals, especially Easter. That's why Orthodox Easter is usually later. It follows the same rule, but on a different system. And it's why most Christians celebrate Christmas on December 25th, while many Orthodox churches celebrate on January 7th. The Gregorian reform worked. It's the de facto system everyone uses today. It still isn't perfect. Even this calendar is still drifting about one day every 3,030 years. Still, compared to Julius Caesar's version, it's astronomically more accurate. And the messy path to this fix reminds us, calendars aren't just for counting days. They still shape entire industries, from agriculture to education to entertainment. There are politics, religion, and power woven into it and into the very days we live by. Of course, not everyone has been satisfied with the Gregorian calendar. Over the centuries, reformers and visionaries have proposed new systems, some practical, some downright bizarre. During the French Revolution, radicals tried to break from tradition with the French Republican calendar. 12 months of exactly 30 days, plus 5 or 6 bonus days at the end. Weeks were replaced by 10-day decades. Farmers hated it, workers hated it, and it quietly vanished after 12 years. In the 20th century, the Soviets ran their own experiment. First a 5-day work week, then a 6-day week, designed to keep factories running non-stop. Officially, the Gregorian calendar stayed in use, but work schedules ignored it. Families ended up with mismatched days off, religious rhythms broke down, and the plan collapsed within a decade. One reformer proposed the International Fixed Calendar, 13 months of exactly 28 days each, with dates lining up the same way every year. It looked tidy on paper, but critics warned it would disrupt traditions tied to the 7-day week. And outside the West, many societies still keep their own calendars alongside the Gregorian one. The Hebrew calendar sets Jewish holidays like Passover and Yom Kippur. The Islamic world follows the Hijri lunar calendar, which shifts holidays like Ramadan through the solar year. China, India, Ethiopia, Nepal, Iran, and many others maintain their own traditional systems, often blending them with the Gregorian for civil use. In the end, every reform and every alternative runs into the same truth. Calendars aren't just numbers, they're culture, religion, habit, and human rhythm, and you can't reprogram that overnight. So here we are, living with the Gregorian calendar. It's the best system we've managed so far, and honestly, it works pretty well. Sure, February is still awkward with its 28 days, an occasional leap day, a leftover from Roman superstition. Our month names are scrambled, thanks to the old 10-month calendar, but we got used to that. And those clever leap year rules. They're so good that the calendar only drifts by one day every 3,000 years, which is, honestly, more of a fun trivia fact than a real problem. And we didn't cover it all today. The concept of a week, for instance, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. Like, why is it 7 days precisely? Neither the sun nor the moon have a 7-day cycle. Who thought of that? In the end, our calendar is a patchwork of Roman politics, papal decrees, and ancient stargazing, stitched together into the rhythm we all live by today. But don't get us wrong, we're not trying to correct it. Look how that turned out before. We just wanted to tell you why it is the way it is. If you enjoyed this journey through time, check out our next video and see what other strange truths history is hiding. Stay curious, always ask why. Because somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known.